Thanks, Alex, for that introduction. Thanks to the Sheep CRC for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to try and answer these three questions in the next 10 minutes. So what is natural capital? Why is your bank interested in it? And how can ASKBILL help? So natural capital is a way of thinking about the natural assets, the stocks of natural assets. That's things like soil, water, biodiversity, natural resources that produce flows of benefits. So the growth of pasture or the growth of animals feeding on that pasture is a flow that have value and benefits to society. So that might have nutritional value, economic value, cultural value, and so forth. It's really just a slightly different way of thinking about the interactions between the economy and society and the environment. So in the past, we tended to think about impacts on the environment and thought that if we manage those impacts down to an acceptable level, then we can simply carry on doing what we do in the economy and society will be fine. The natural capital lens is really saying, well, actually, hang on, you can't have an economy if you don't have the environment that it depends on. So, the pristine water resource there might be totally essential to maintain a wild fishery. The beach is essential for your tourism industry and so forth. So that sort of equal weighting of impacts and dependencies is really critical. So why are banks interested? Well, the facetious answer is because it's got the word capital, so of course they're interested. The more serious answer, and I can summarize this slide in just one word, and it's risk. So banks that are starting to be aware of impacts and dependencies of natural capital will look at a commodity supply chain like sheep production, and they will see that there are risks to the companies involved in that supply chain that they do not currently have good visibility on. Those might be operational risks, they might be legal, reputational, market access, etc. And they then translate into risks for the financial institutions, non-performing loans, perhaps assets that they've invested in that aren't worth as much as they thought, and ultimately less revenue, less profitability from their involvement in the sector. So this is not something that all banks are across by any means, but there is a leading group of international financial institutions. It includes NAB and Rabobank. And they signed up to this thing called the Natural Capital Declaration in 2012, which committed them to incorporating natural capital into their accounting, reporting, and their financial products by 2020. There's a long way to go, but they have produced a supplement to the Natural Capital Protocol, which is a generic framework for all kinds of financial institutions to start getting their heads around natural capital. And then there's the work that Alex mentioned that I've been helping them with, which is about natural capital credit risk assessment in agricultural lending. So what has natural capital got to do with credit risk? Credit risk being the risk that someone that you've provided something to doesn't pay you back. Currently, very little. So a bank will give a loan to a producer and they'll want to look at your last 3 years' financial records and your credit history. They won't really ask a lot of questions about how you're managing the natural capital resource that underpins that financial performance. But the banks that are thinking about natural capital are starting to worry that, perhaps those last 3 years' financial records look good because of over-application of nitrogen-based fertilizer. It's boosted yields in the short term, but it's going to lead to a build-up of soil acidity, which is going to reduce yields and it will result in a reduced ability to repay the loan. So it becomes a credit risk. So that begs the question, how on earth do you start to get a handle on natural capital credit risk? So this slide summarises the work that we've done over just the past few months, and I want to acknowledge the inputs from James and Alex and Lewis in particular to this as well, where we have tried to scope out for Australian sheep production what are the key natural capital impacts and dependencies that give rise to natural capital credit risk. And they fall under, there's a number of them, that they fall under these 6 broad headings of water, climate, soil, biodiversity, energy, and emissions. I can't talk about all of them, but for each of them we've had to think about how you could go about actually measuring that risk. And it really isn't straightforward, because there's no obvious single metric that tells you how to measure the dependency on rainwater, which is obviously a critical dependency. So, as you all know, it's not just the amount of rainfall, but when you get it, how reliable it is, how efficient your pasture is at taking it up, and so forth. That does at least suggest that there are some indicators that you could start to look at. So the amount of rainfall during the pasture growing season. There's various indexes of rainfall variability available from BOM. You can measure your pasture water use efficiency. And these are all things that are actually pretty easily measured using data from the producer or from other suppliers. What's perhaps missing at the moment is, okay, you can establish your historical baseline using that data, but how is that likely to change over the next 10 years? You really need to start to look at the regional outputs from global climate models and start to take that into account. Now, this is where ASKBILL comes in. So looking at those individual indicators is better than nothing, but it sort of misses the point that they're all interconnected. And what ASKBILL can do is take all of the precipitation data, combine that with a pasture model, combine that with your feed demand calculator, and as there are more and more users, it will then be able to come up with benchmarks for performance. And you should then be able to do what-if scenarios and say that, okay, at a certain stocking rate, you're in the 90th percentile for this particular risk, but if you reduce your stocking rate to a certain level, then you can get down to the 50th percentile. And that could be really useful information for the producer, as well as telling the lender what the risk is for that particular investment. Another example, soil quality, again, very complex, many different dimensions to it, but there are some big ticket items like acidity and salinity and erosion and so forth that would definitely be worth measuring. Metrics are available for those things. Again, ASKBILL has the capacity and the potential to bring all of those metrics together, but there's probably a bit more work to be done there in that case, linking with resources that are available from soil mapping data, satellite data, and so forth, to try and get that forward-looking risk assessment. So obviously this is going to add some cost. So what are the benefits to it? Well, to the producer, fundamentally, if you can improve the management of the natural capital assets that you fundamentally depend on, then that should lower the risk of your production, and that should increase the rate of return on your own investment. It's also increasingly important to maintain social license, also to maintain access to certain premium markets. And in the future, it should be possible to see an actual lower cost of capital for more sustainable producers. Why? Because the lender sees a benefit anytime that they get to identify a risk and manage the risk more effectively. They see a better return across their portfolio of loans. And if the banking sector is competitive, then that benefit should be passed through in the form of a lower cost of capital to the more sustainable farms. And finally, there's a benefit to a whole bunch of other third parties, consultants, processors, research providers, technology providers, who both provide and benefit from these information flows, and that will improve targeting of services and overall improvement of the supply chain management. So in conclusion, we've found that it's possible to make a start. It's hard, but it's possible to make a start assessing these natural capital risks using a combination of producer data and public data. It's definitely not an exact science, but we've got to start learning by actually doing it. And there's a real need for an integrating platform that brings these data sources together in a way that different users can get what they want out of them. And ASKBILL has the potential to be that, and it's already halfway there. Thank you.